Hey everybody, welcome back. We are on Unit 2, Economic Indicators and the Business Cycle. And we are focused on Subunit 2.2, Limitations of GDP. So let's talk about GDP for just a second. What is GDP? Guys, the long definition is this. It is the total amount of final goods and services produced within a country, within a specific time period, measured in monetary terms, i.e. measured with the dollar. But in other words, in a simpler way of saying it, is a measurement of the total value a country produces. And guys, that is something we very much want to know, the total value a country produces. Why? The total value a country produces determines its income. Just like your parents care very much about the total value of what you produce, okay? If they're hoping that when you get older, you become a doctor, you produce a lot of value, you get a lot of income. You become a software engineer, you produce a lot of value, you get a lot of income, right? The value we produce determines our income. So GDP, very important measurement. Economists definitely care about it. However, we got to look at it with a critical eye, guys. There are some limitations to GDP, and they're right over here. So let's get to it. Let's start with number one, population. Guys, again, what is GDP? Total amount of value a country produces. Well, it kind of matters whether you have 100 people in your economy, 1 million people, 100 million, or 1 billion, right? I mean, think about China and the United States. Their GDPs just about getting equal these days. China's GDP and the US GDP getting really, really close. But if you divide it by the population, if you get it on a per capita basis, China's GDP, about 1/4, maybe 1/3, 1/4 the size of the United States on a per capita basis, okay? So we really do care about getting it at a per capita basis because what we really kind of want to know is the total value produced per person. That seems a little bit more appropriate, right? So let's get it into a per capita terms. Number two, issues with the unit of measurement. What is the unit of measurement? Well, what's that last part of the definition I give you for GDP? Measured in monetary terms, i.e. measured with the dollar. Is the dollar a good unit of measurement? No, the dollar is not a good unit of measurement. Why? What's the number one attribute we want for a unit of measurement? We want its value to stay constant across time. What does the value of the dollar generally do across time? It goes that way. Why? Because prices of goods and services tend to go up. Because of inflation, the value of our dollar goes down. And if we're measuring something in dollars, hey, that's problematic when we start comparing across time. Now, we can do something about this, okay? We can adjust for inflation, okay? We can get an inflation-adjusted GDP measurement called real GDP. But we need to know, guys, that we need to do that. So anytime we hear somebody talk about GDP, hey, did you adjust for inflation? That needs to be a question asked. Number three, time it takes to produce that value. Okay, let's just imagine we've got a country, and let's just say their population doesn't change from one year to the next, and we find out they produce the same amount of value from one year to the next. We might say, oh, they're about the same off as they used to be, right? They're no better off than they used to be. But how about if we found out their work week dropped from 42 hours to 37 hours, which means a week, that is, guys. 42 hours to 72 hours, I can't even speak, 42 hours to 37 hours in a week. Well, guys, what would that mean? They got 5 hours more time for leisure. So, guys, their overall well-being has improved. So we need to look at leisure. What happened to leisure? What happened to the amount of time in their average work week? If that amount of time dropped, if they've got less time in their average work week, we want to take that into account, and GDP doesn't. GDP just completely ignores that. Let's go to number four, the environment. Guys, GDP, really bad on the environment. GDP doesn't care much about the environment at all. If you go into a forestry area and you just totally deforest it, okay, if you go in where there's a lot of trees and you cut all the trees down, like if you go into the Amazon, you start just chopping trees down and selling those trees, hey, GDP, value's going up as you sell those trees, and so GDP's going up, but you're hurting the environment. Guys, also, if let's say we had some type of oil spill, all the money we spend trying to clean up the oil spill, that goes into GDP too. And on top of that, hey, if we've got a factory out there and it's producing something and we've got emissions going into the atmosphere, which is degrading the value of the atmosphere, we just ignore that thing. We just say, okay, that whatever, GDP doesn't pay attention. So guys, GDP, not great on the environment. Now, there are such things like green GDP measurements that try to account for this, but the general GDP measurement that we talk about in this class, guys, not great on the environment at all. Next, it is an amoral measurement. What do I mean by being an amoral measurement? Guys, they count it as value if somebody's willing to pay for it. Guys, in other words, cigarettes, oh yeah. Alcohol, absolutely. It does not matter at all what is being produced, okay? If somebody's willing to pay for it, GDP says that is value to society. It is a very amoral measurement, okay? Number 6, inequality, another really, really big one. GDP doesn't tell us anything about income inequality in a society. Guys, you could have GDP increasing, economists say, hey, look at all the more value, but you could have income inequality getting a lot worse. GDP doesn't say anything about income inequality, another huge weakness of GDP. And then finally, number 7, for it to be included in GDP, the government has to see it. You see, guys, we miss a lot of stuff. Number 1 thing we miss, household production. You've got that garden in the backyard, not in GDP. You fix your own car, not in GDP. You mow your own lawn, not in GDP. And remember, if you pay somebody to mow your lawn, as long as you're doing that over the table, as long as you're doing that legally and you're reporting it, guys, that's in GDP. But when you mow your own lawn, that was value produced, but it's not in GDP simply because the government didn't see it. Informal markets, okay? So this is something, a legal activity, but nobody's reporting it. This is that under-the-table stuff, not seen by the government, not in GDP. Some economies have humongous informal sectors, and so we miss all kinds of things in the GDP measurement, even though value is absolutely being produced. And then finally, black markets. That's where the thing being sold is illegal, and so people are going to report it to the government. Hey, that's your heroin, if you will, right there. And so not in GDP. Now, hold on for a second. Heroin, wait, we wouldn't want that in GDP anyhow. Yes, we would. I know. Bad stuff. Never ever do it. But guys, GDP and amoral measurement. Guys, if people are willing to pay for it, we count it in GDP. So the only reason we don't count black market activity in GDP is not because of our morals. It's not because we go, that stuff's bad for you. It's simply because we say we don't have any idea how much of that is being done because it's not reported to the government. So again, government has to see it for it to be in GDP. That's also a limitation of GDP. Whew, there they are. Those are the big ones. I don't think you need to measure them. You just kind of need to think about them and just get a general sense of them and try to make sense out of them. And I think that's all you got to do with these things. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.